All right, back at it here on the Kauffman Corner podcast. If you're catching us via the podcast, remember, we stream live Sunday nights, 10 p.m. Central is when you can catch us. So you can be a part of the conversation in the chat room, talk a little Royals baseball with your fellow Royals fans as we continue our deep dive through the offseason. Last week, we were talking free agents. This week, we welcome back one of my personal favorites. I used to get to talk to this guy every single week during the season. He continues to be myself, Curtis, all the guys that work on the program are one of our favorite weekly guests we ever had. Mark Teahen is going to join us here in a second. We will talk about his career coming up, being at the epicenter of Moneyball. When he came, being part of a giant trade, Carlos Beltran deal that brought him to the Kansas City Royals, and then ultimately being traded to the White Sox, quickly to the Blue Jays at the end. His playing career and what he's doing right now. We talked to Mark Teahen. That's coming up next here on the Kauffman Corner.
You're listening to Kauffman Corner, the most in-depth analysis of the Kansas City Royals, breaking down the Royals like no one else can. Kauffman Corner is hosted by Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro. Rany is a co-founder of Baseball Prospectus, author of Rany on the Royals, and former columnist for Grantland, The Ringer, and The Athletic. Soren is the award-winning afternoon drive host of the program on Sports Radio 810 WHB in Kansas City. Kauffman Corner is proudly brought to you by Gann Asphalt and Concrete, Kansas City's nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews, and every project comes with a written warranty. Find them online at GannAsphalt.com or call 816-484-3338. Gann Asphalt and Concrete, one contractor, all things parking lot. Now, here's your hosts, Rany Jazayerli and Soren Petro.
All right, thank you very much, Curtis. We are brought to you, as you heard, by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete. All things parking lot, one contractor, solving parking lot problems since 1994. Rany, a chance, as I mentioned, Mark Teahen, one of my favorite guys that we had as a weekly guest. It was so great the conversations we would have with him and get an insight into what was going on with the ball club. And a guy that I think's got one of the coolest careers, right? Yeah, it'd be great to be Babe Ruth, but his, woven into the fabric of one of the best baseball books ever written, I just think that those, when you've got a little niche like that, it's fantastic, and looking forward to hearing what all he's got going on right now and just his reflections of what's going on in his career.
Yeah, no, Mark was one of my favorite players. He, had the misfortune of playing for the Royals at one of their fallow periods. And sometimes when you're a good player on a not so good team, you take the hits from the fan base that are, ought to be directed elsewhere. And I think he took some, unfair criticisms during his career when he was actually one of the few reasons sometimes to tune into a Royals game. And had a very interesting career. He finished his playing days with a season in Italy, of all places. I'm interested to talk to him about that. But always, like I said, always a great interview. Always had a good sense of humor. Always, I felt was very self-aware about how lucky he was to be a professional athlete, and play Major League Baseball, and seems to have settled himself into a very nice post sporting career life. Married, has kids, doing very well, very happy. So I'm really excited to catch up with him.
Let's welcome in the aforementioned Mark Teahen. He joins us here on the Kauffman Corner podcast. Mark, how are you, buddy?
Good. How are you guys doing?
Doing very good. What am I looking at here? We got an array of bats. I always say, listen, I remember talking about David DeJesus when he came up. I said, look, I think there's going to be a lot of different jerseys hanging in his basement, right? He's going to have different stops. He's always going to be a guy that if you're missing an outfielder, you're going to want to go get him. And I'm always intrigued by what the basements look like for you guys when they're all done. All the memories, the different things. What are we looking at back there? What's behind you?
I'm actually in my garage because I don't like to throw too much stuff in the house. Like I don't need a shrine to myself in the house. So we have a little kind of gym in the garage. So you're looking at my St. Mary's baseball jersey, and then my wife's volleyball jersey from Georgia Southern. So
that's one of the things people may not know. You're probably not the best athlete in the family.
She'll tell you I'm not, but yeah, it's a debate.
Yeah, that's fantastic. Where are all the bats?
The bat collection is it's weird. A lot of guys like would just collect bats from the best player on the other team or whatever. For me, it's more guys that I try to get veteran guys that helped impact my career when I was coming up. So I've got Matt Stairs, Mike Sweeney, Mark Resalonik, Reggie Sanders, Tony Graffinino, a lot of the veteran guys that kind of made it easier for me to get comfortable in the big leagues.
When you played, we hadn't started the era of guys trading jerseys and trading gear. It's like at some point, like after your career, it became almost like guys were self-aware of what the sports memorabilia world was. And now everybody's, swap. You ever think back and be like, oh man, I should have been swapping some stuff out here along the way.
Well, for sure. I mean, I could have built a nice collection, but at the same time, it probably would have just ended up the same spot, like here in the garage. I don't know. I'm not trying to have it all throughout the house. A kind of little corner of, the life that I once led, and it's awesome, but it's not going to run the house.
Already more subtle than I would be, because trust me, it would be in every room if I had been able to make it to the big league. So kudos to you. Let's start with this. I mean, what was it like, reading about yourself? Like very early in your career, there's a book that ends up being one of the most, I think influential books in baseball history. What's it like coming up and trying to break in? I know baseball's culture is different than any other sport, because just getting to the big leagues is an accomplishment, right? Mm-hmm. You spend so much time in the minor leagues, buses, overnight travel, little towns. It's kind of unique in the sense you don't go from playing at the Horseshoe at Ohio State in front of 110,000 and being an acclaimed individual that everybody's cheering for. It's smaller crowds. It really is a grind just to get to the big leagues. And you come up with fanfare and everybody that was in that book. Did you realize at the moment what you were a part of at that time?
Yes and no. I mean, I met Michael Lewis, who wrote Moneyball, right away. I mean, got drafted, and I think he kind of came to see where most of my draft class went straight to Vancouver, and we started there. I was only there a couple of weeks and got moved up to Modesto. The A's at the time didn't have a low A team, just 2 teams in the California League. So a few of the guys I got drafted with kind of moved up fairly quickly. I just thought it was cool to just have a little more insight, like what they were saying in the draft room or, leading up to the draft, what their thoughts were on me. I mean, most guys, you get drafted and it's kind of like, okay, on to start my career. But it was nice to have that insight into, what the A's were trying to do or what they saw in me, even more so than another organization might have at the time. But it was weird. I mean, it was cool because of their philosophy. I got drafted with a ton of other college players, and we were kind of all the same spot in our life. And it made it easy when we got into pro ball that we were kind of all on the same path and everything else. But it was weird as we went through the process. I think there was some fanfare. So some people were really cheering for it to really work out. But in the same way, there was a lot on the other end of it because, I think if you talk to Michael Lewis, he's more just like, hey, I was just stressing how the A's were finding value in undervalued players and finding a different way to look at it because they had to, because they didn't have the finances to keep up with these big market teams. But I think a lot of old school baseball people were like, well, they're, dogging all the scouts and everything else. And so I think there was a group of people that were kind of hoping we fell on our face, and none of us really made the big leagues to prove like, oh, see, the old way is the only way to do it. So
now, Mark, so you go from being, part of the Moneyball A's draft, part of this analytic organization, a very successful organization. They won over 100 games. You were drafted, and then over 90 games the next 2 years. And you're working your way through the system. You're a well-regarded prospect, but you're not having the hopes and dreams of an entire fan base being put on you. And then, one day I assume you got the call that, you're being traded and you're the headline piece for a future Hall of Famer named Carlos Beltran. And everybody in Kansas City now thinks that you're going to have to be either a superstar or they're going to blame you for all of their team's inadequacies. What was that like? Well, take us through getting that call, finding out what's going on, and, the adjustment you had to make to suddenly being, even though you spent another half season in the minor leagues, I can say as part of that fan base, from the moment that trade was made, there were probably unrealistic expectations being placed on you personally, and what that was like, how that affected your career.
Yeah, I mean, truthfully, looking back at it, when I got traded, nothing about who I got traded for was stressful for me. I was just excited that I now had an opportunity, because in Oakland, I was going to Double-A to start the 2004 season, and I was like, okay, I need to put it together this year because the A's don't re-sign anybody, and Chavez was supposed to leave in free agency. So I knew I needed to work through Double-A, get to Triple-A to where I might have that shot to be the opening day third baseman for the A's going into 2005. And as it worked out, a few days into spring training, they signed Chavez to an extension. So then going into that season, I'm like, well, I'd better figure out, same thing, still got to prove myself, because I really in A-ball hadn't put it all together. So that first year in Double-A was when I really started rolling and, solidified my draft, where I was drafted, and, started showing I could be a big leaguer one day. So at that point, I knew I either needed to get traded or switch positions, and, eventually both happened. But when I got traded over, I really just looked at it as an opportunity and, excited to get somewhere where I was going to get a good look. But I also, it's funny now, I was looking back at that, I was in a sweet spot of, and I think you have to be as a player, but I was very confident, even cocky, and not outwardly necessarily, but, the thought that I was going to an organization and there might be pressure because one of their best players just got traded away, and, I was part of the package coming back. I was confident, and, that didn't worry me at all. I was just like, well, they're getting a good player in return, so they should feel happy about it.
I'm curious now. We hear so much about launch angles and different things like that. When you came to the A's, did anybody be like, okay, we're going to tweak your swing, we're going to tweak your stance, were there people jumping in trying to change things? How much, how much were they, having a vision for you, and how much was it just, Mark, what do you want to do and how do we help you?
It was a balance. I mean, obviously they drafted me because I was willing to take a walk, and I feel like I had a good understanding of the strike zone from early on. So that was part of my appeal to them to draft me. I didn't have tons of power in college. I think I showed projectability because of my size, but hadn't really put it together. So definitely once I got to Oakland, my first instructs, we worked on a few things, but it was really my second instruct. So after my first full season, went back to instructs, and they basically talked to me about that next year being in Double-A. And it's like, okay, this is where you really have to start putting it together. And I spent a month of instructs kind of tweaking my swing, because I never throughout my career handled the inside pitch great. But early in my career, in college, they mainly try to get you out of way, and I was really good at going the other way. So I had a lot of success there. But, as I started moving up through the minor leagues, guys start pitching both sides of the plate. So it was really something I had to figure out. But I spent a whole instructional league working on that, and I swear I might have had 2 hits throughout that whole month. And then one of the last days of instructs, I hit a couple homers and, kind of left instructs feeling good about it. But it took sacrificing a full month of success to, get to feeling comfortable with it. So it was a balance. I mean, I think they liked what I had as far as just, hand-eye coordination, putting the barrel on the ball, but there were for sure some adjustments that needed to be made.
So Mark, you mentioned, being with the A's and, the fact that, for instance, they were interested in you for your plate discipline and ability to draw walks, which everyone takes for granted now. But in 2002, the A's were absolutely at the forefront of analytics in general. You go from there to Kansas City, where they had a reputation of being behind the curve in this regard. And certainly when it comes to things like plate discipline, the Royals have always been on the opposite end of the spectrum from Oakland. Was there a culture shock for you going from, the A's organization, which preached, the importance of on-base percentage, to an organization that didn't at all? And did you sense a difference in the quality of instruction or the way that the tools that they gave you to, improve as a player?
I didn't see a huge difference. It's different too, though. When you're in the lower minor leagues, I feel like you're getting a whole lot more instruction and like, hey, this is where we need you to get to. And then once you get to like AAA or the big league level, it's more like daily adjustments and making sure you're, getting back to certain things you've had success with. I mean, by the time you get to AAA, you better have a lot figured out. So I guess I didn't see a huge difference, but I also felt like I didn't see the lower levels of the Kansas City organization. So I didn't know what was being taught to, the guys that were freshly drafted. But as far as instruction, I mean, there's great coaches all across the board. I thought Keith Lippman, who was the farm director with the Oakland A's for forever, and he was there when I was there, I thought he was really, really good. But it wasn't like I went to Kansas City and thought anybody was, not up to the task. I just thought Keith was really, really good at what he was doing over in Oakland.
You, as you got here in your second year was your highest slug, and you'd been down and you came back up, and it seemed like that was one year where you were really turning on the ball, right? And was that because they were challenging you? And in that year, you got pitches that you could handle, and I think your slug that year was a career high. I know I was looking through it the other day. What was 517, right? And so is that because again they challenged you, or was there something you found there at a moment in time, and then you weren't able to recreate it after an off season and come back? What do you remember about that second season and the extra, over the fence power you seem to possess that year?
Yeah, I think, really that year and then the 2004 year when I got traded over to the Royals were the 2 years I had the most power. I, hit quite a few home runs in AA and AAA that 2004 year. And then, 2006 kind of put it together. 2006 was a weird year because it was my best and worst year in a lot of ways, because I started the year really bad the first month and a half and got sent down, and then spent a month in Omaha. And I mean, for me, I think it was good to kind of take a step back. Of course, as a player, you never want to go back to AAA, but it was necessary for me there. I finished my rookie year with a good September, and I kind of just assumed it would roll into the next year, and it hadn't. So it was good to get back and just really focus back in without as much pressure. I mean, the jump from AAA to the big leagues is huge talent-wise, but, lifestyle-wise and coverage-wise and everything. Everything's a huge, huge step up. So I think it was nice to get back to AAA and just really kind of focus in on the game a little bit, my swing. And I had a really good month in Omaha. And I think at that time, a lot of it's mental. I think I realized that if I can crush in AAA, I should at least be able to be a good player in the big leagues. So I came back with a lot of confidence. But I do wish I had played in the era now. I think you can get overwhelmed with information, but I have done a few things and looked at a few different, analytical things they have now to where they can kind of break down your swing. Okay, like your hips are firing here and then your hands are firing and everything. And I think just my sequence probably was more dialed in during that year. And funny enough, that season was cut short. So like I said, that season was very weird because it was a bad first month and a half or month. And then I go down to AAA for a month, come back and swing it about as well as I've ever swung it. And then the last 3 weeks to a month, I was out because I had labrum surgery. And so my right arm was bothering me all year with labrum. But in some ways, being a right-handed thrower and kind of right-hand dominant with my swing, I think the labrum thing might have been helping my swing because I wasn't pulling through as much. I was letting my backside kind of work. And, knowing more now and understanding the swing a little bit more, I'm curious, like, I should just rode that labrum the rest of my career and move me to DH or first base, and I'll just keep hitting homers. But, you never know. But yeah, after coming back from the labrum surgery that next year, I was still kind of getting back to full speed as the season went on. And I hit for a high average that next year, but didn't have much power. And I kind of chalked it up to, I'm still recovering. But, I think part of it was when this was weaker, it let my, backside kind of work through a little bit better.
It's interesting. You mentioned like you talking about how some of the high speed video that players have nowadays and the way your hips fire before your hands, et cetera. Like, do you feel like if that the kind of tools that players have today were available when you were players. Were you the kind of guy that would have dove into that? Do you think it would have made you a better player if you would have been able to break this down at a granular level and figure out what works and stick with it? Like, so it seems like some players want as much information as they can get. And some players, especially hitters, they don't want to have too much crowding their brain when they're facing down a 95-mile-an-hour fastball. Were you one of those players who wanted everything, or you try to keep it simple when you were up there?
Both. I mean, and I always say I've played with a lot of players, and two of the better hitters I played with are complete opposite ends of the spectrum. You got Paul Konerko in Chicago, who was like overly analytical, and he could go watch video and be like, this mechanic is off. I need to go change this, like keep my elbow a little bit more inside or something. He'd go in the cage, rep it out for like 30 minutes, start feeling it, and then he'd go in the game that night and be able to replicate that and he wouldn't like leave the cage until he really felt that one movement was dialed in. And at the other end of the spectrum, you have a guess at who that might be?
At the other end of the spectrum, I'm trying to
of the good hitter spectrum, but the
Mike Sweet. Oh no! Just grip it and rip it type of mindset. Matt
Stairs.
Billy Butler.
Oh, you played with Billy. That's right. Okay.
Because
yes.
for me, Billy, we would joke about it. Like he'd go up for one at bat and look terrible on 2 pitches, and then crush the next one because he wasn't like, oh, this guy's attacking me this way. Oh, I felt bad on this swing. I mean, he'd go up there and do a high leg kick pitch 1, a toe tap pitch 2, and no stride pitch 3, and be on time with all of it. And it was, I mean, like I said, credit to both guys. They found the way that worked best for them. But I think as we get into all these analytics and everything, it is figuring out what type of hitter you are, whether you need all that information or if you're better to just be like, hey, see ball, hit ball, and keep it very simple so that, I'm not thinking myself throughout the at bat.
It's obvious you have an appreciation for both guys, right?
Yeah.
And what they did. I'm just curious because I remember when Billy came up and I remember that toe tap and I remember thinking, well, this is a disaster. Like this isn't going to work. Like how, what's this guy got going on here? And, and it did work. And like, do you have those reactions to like, what the hell is this? Like the guys that aren't just your prototype, everybody, when you get to it, you start there are some of the fundamentals that they kind of start with their weird things. And then it all comes down to what you have to do to come through and try to keep the bat head in the zone and everything along those lines. And I'm certainly no swing doctor by any stretch of the imagination. I read numbers. That's my extent to baseball. I clearly can't physically play the game in any way, shape, or form. But like I've seen enough baseball players to know that was different. And that just screamed at me. What's the vibe like in the clubhouse, in spring training, at the cages, when you see guys that have those things that are kind of extreme and different and unique to their style?
I mean, it's strange when you're playing at the highest level and you see certain guys come through, and even at the highest level, they're just different. You know what I mean? Like Billy was one of those guys where he was just, he could put a barrel on a baseball, and even if it didn't always look the cleanest, like he found ways to barrel things up, and it was impressive. I remember like Josh Hamilton coming through, like he just hit the ball. It came off his bat different, Albert Pujols playing third base. I was actually just telling my 11U baseball team about it, like staying through a baseball or getting your body in good position to where even your misses are hard hit balls. I remember, played St. Louis a lot, and he got so many hits through the shortstop third base side. And, I'm sure the pitchers were complaining I was out of position or whatever, but, he would just hit the ball and stay through it so well that even his miss hits were, hard hit balls and a lot of hits. So yeah, I mean, guys definitely talk about it in the clubhouse and in the locker room. And you just kind of have to appreciate it. I mean, most of us are all there because we're good ball players and grind it out and work hard. And not to say those guys don't, but, I would say there's a level of player, and then there's just certain things that pop out about certain guys, and all you can do is, really appreciate it.
Well, since you mentioned, now I have to ask you, you're coaching your kids like little league team. Is that what you're telling them stories about when I faced off against Albert Pujols? What's the reaction of these kids? Are they like, like riveted by the fact that you were a former major leaguer, or are they put at the point now where they're rolling their eyes and they're like, oh, Coach Mark is telling us stories again about him playing against the major leagues? Well, how does that go?
Yeah, no. When they join the team, I hand them all a baseball card so they know what's up. No, my oldest, he's only played like Little League, Cal Ripken, stuff like that, and only played in the spring because we just haven't played all kinds of other sports. But he's now kind of to an age where I felt like he was ready to do a little bit more. I don't love the travel ball thing. I'd much rather than play like a long season where you're working towards a goal and a championship after 3-4 months. But talent-wise, I think he's ready for it, so we've jumped into it. I don't think I bore him with too many stories. Like I'm not a big, hey, sit down and listen to another dad story every night. But if a situation comes up that the story helps prove a point that I'm trying to get across to him or his teammates, I definitely share it. But like I've been coaching these kids now for 3 or 4 months, and just the other day, someone was like, "So, did you ever play against like Derek Jeter?" I was like, "Yeah, we played. Yeah, we played during the same era, so yeah, I played against him." And I think even though they know that they still don't really register, different things that I've been able to do, and I'm not going to force feed it to them, but I'd rather them just listen to me because I show them how to swing the bat and it actually works for them. So I'd rather earn their respect out of them seeing the results out of stuff I'm teaching them, but if they're questioning me, I'm not afraid to drop it on them a little bit. So.
Yeah. Brian Waters told me, listen, all you want from a coach, the former Chiefs offensive lineman, was an all-pro and pro. So all you want from a coach is for him to make you better in any way, whether it's designing something, whether it's a technique, whatever it is. And if they do that, you'll run through a wall for them. Stories are great, right? Like at fantasy camp, I'm sure you light up the room with some of the great stories that are there. But for those kids, hey, they want to know how to get down on the ball. They want to know how to drive the ball. You got to make them better players to earn their trust. And, the coaching part's hard, right? Like you figure that out real quick. I remember Buddy Bell told the story that, when he first got into coaching, they said, "I want you to work with this young third baseman." And he went out and worked with him for a day. And he goes, "Yeah, that guy's not going to be any good. Like, you need to move on." They're like, "Yeah, we're not moving on. He's the guy." Well, it's not there. They're like, "Well, then you're out." Like he's the guy. You have to find a way to make it work. And I thought that was, amazing insight. He's like, "Oh, okay. Well, wait a minute. Hang on. Let me give it another try here." What's your memories of the clubhouse, the guys, the camaraderie, the grind of it? Like, I think as fans, everybody goes out to the ball game, has a great time. Maybe even you're a season ticket holder. You go out to all the home games. Then you guys go away and it's time to recharge your batteries and mow the grass and do the different things that you haven't been doing because you've been out at the ballpark 7-8 nights in a row. And if you're a fan that goes to one game here or there, what a great night it is. Man, it'd be great to do this every single night. And then to do it virtually 6 out of 7 days for 6 months. Like what are the things that you remember, the highs and lows of being a big leaguer?
Yeah, I mean, it's more highs than lows for sure. I mean, as you're working through the minor leagues, it's definitely grind and stuff. And, even like you said, I was there for a wonderful era of Royals baseball where, we were usually out of it by midsummer. But, you still got to go and grind and make sure you're, of course, trying to help the team win, but you're also trying to produce as much as you can to make sure you're valuable and you have a job the next year. But I just love the long hours in the clubhouse. I mean, it's looking back, there's so much time spent at the ball field. You get there 1 o'clock or whatever. Joe McEwing was one of my favorite teammates because he, skill wise, didn't have the skills of a lot of players in the big leagues and, size or anything else, but I could not beat him to the ballpark. Like I don't know if he had, something on my car, but like there was days I just randomly, like I got nothing else to do. I might as well just get there and he'd already be there. So, but you get there and I just enjoyed the whole process of it. Like I spent too much time in the training room, but I had to get my work in there and the weight room and everything else. And just after the game, sitting around your locker, bull crapping with your teammates and stuff. I mean, I don't know. It's nowadays there's not all that. It's not all that often where I work out with some buddies and then sit around in my sliders and just kind of bull crap about the day. So, stuff like that is what I really miss. And I love the travel. The travel can be a grind sometimes, but I really enjoyed it. I think it'd be really hard now, being married and with 3 kids. Like, I respect the guys that, still have to be on that grind. I mean, of course, I wish I was still playing in a lot of ways, but I'm pretty fortunate that we kind of started our family right as my career was winding down. So I've been really lucky to be able to be around for, all of their stuff as they've been growing up. So.
Now, Mark, you started as a third baseman, but you kind of moved all around the corners. You played right field a lot. You were willing to go wherever the Royals wanted you to, which meant
including second base.
Yes, right? Exactly. Which led to, was it 2009? You were I want to say made to start, or you were asked to start at second base 3 times. I'm just very curious, because I remember when this happened at the time, I wasn't sure if this was genius or desperation or both from the Royals, but can you take us through how you ended up playing second base? And I remember you made some good plays over there, but were you prepping for weeks or months ahead, taking ground balls there? Or was it just kind of like you showed up at the ballpark one day and they're like, can you fill in at second base today?
I guess a bit of both, but it was, I came up as a third baseman, and then of course got moved to the outfield kind of right after the shoulder thing, but also, they wanted me to move to the outfield so Alex Gordon could play third. So I might be the only guy in history that got my position moved to the outfield to where a guy eventually won 8 Gold Gloves. But, once I moved once, I was kind of like, okay, I'm willing to move wherever. I wish I would have been able to kind of get back to third and kind of stick there more. But yeah, the year I went to second, I forget who we had slid over to third, but I think Alex was in the outfield by that point, and we had Jose Guillen in right. So it was kind of.
Was it Alberto Callaspo, maybe?
It might have been Callaspo.
He was playing, I know he played both second and third.
Yeah. So I started early on in spring that spring working with Frank White and a few other coaches, turned double plays and stuff. But I mean, I played middle infield growing up. So my first year at St. Mary's, I was a second baseman, and then just kind of kept growing. So I moved over to third. But it was one of those things where I felt like I could do it. And in some ways I liked that I had to focus so small in, being a big guy. The more I focused small and got my movements smaller, I felt like I was more athletic. So, in a lot of ways, I thought it helped me. But it was a little tough to spend the whole spring training kind of getting locked in at third. And then at second. And then, like you said, I think I played three games there up in Chicago. And one of those games, I think Guillen ended up getting hurt. So I go out to right field, and then the rest of the year just kind of bouncing around. But I remember that year going into that spring, I think it was me and Willie Bloomquist kind of battling for the starting spot. And one of the coaches I overheard just kind of saying like, oh, how good would we be if Teahen's like our first guy off the bench, or the, utility guy? And I was like, I don't know what you're talking about, but no, that's not a good plan whatsoever. So I think that spring I went out and hit like 450, which spring is spring, but I was like, I'm not doing that crap where I'm coming off the bench, especially having been a starter my whole career to that point. So it was extra motivation, and I was happy to learn a new position to make sure I was in the lineup every day.
Do you look back at it? I mean, 6'3", 230 you were listed at, and you guys are always in great shape when you play the game. So maybe you really were 230. I thought you looked like you were 240, 245. I mean, what did you really, you were a big guy. Like what did you really weigh while you were playing?
During my playing days, the highest I got was like 230.
Okay.
Yeah.
That's a giant second baseman.
It is. Yeah.
Like, do you look back at
break the mold?
Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
Oh, I was just saying, like, yeah, I mean, of course I was kind of like, I'm probably pretty too big for this, but at the same time, it's all, the game's always changing and everything else. And the shortstops are never as big as they were. So I was like, maybe I'm breaking the mold, who knows? But I was going to give it my best run and, see where it took us.
Yeah. Was there a time when things like that were happening that you're like, all right, they don't quite have it figured out here? Like to me, it seems like we talk about it a lot. Like, look, right now the Royals, have several catchers. And so MJ Melendez, goes out to the outfield, and there's a feeling here when we talk about it, and the fans, like, here we go again. We've seen this where it's always a position change as opposed to, well, let's trade a guy, right? Like that seemed to be one of the things the A's did. They had a surplus. They traded for things that they needed in that deal instead of trying to, make everybody a fish out of water and try to, plug it in. I know when you came over, I know part of what made that deal, and having had conversations with Allard Baird, was they had limits on the payroll, and they were trying to fill what they thought were the last holes to try to round out and put a team together. And Billy, of course, came up, and they had Billy out in the outfield. And where his toe tap was a little bit different, so was Billy with a glove on his hand. That was a little different too. And, he settled in finally at DH. And, but after playing some first base where it made sense, was there a time that you kind of looked around and maybe when the trade to the White Sox came that you're like, I'm not sure these guys get it? Did that ever creep into your head when you're playing?
I don't think I ever had the feeling that they didn't get it. I definitely had the feeling that, like, Allard or even Dayton when he first got there wasn't necessarily getting what he needed to put a team together. I mean, I think the reason there's so much bouncing around and like, oh, that's not his position, but let's try him there. When you look at the big market teams, they have a singular hole to fill, and they'll make sure there's a good player there until that prospect's fully ready to fill that spot. Whereas, the Royals, with the payroll situation and everything else, unless you kind of get a lot of prospects to hit at the same time, it's really hard to, fill out that roster, which obviously happened in 14-15 where, all those guys kind of came of age together, and then it was easy to go out and get a few extra, not easy, but, they made those sacrifices to trade some good young players to fill those holes. So I think it's a balance, and it's a philosophy where, when they made the trade with Tampa to get Sheets and Wade Davis, and then they gave up obviously Will Myers and gave up some good talent. And that was a situation where they actually traded a prospect away, but it was because the organization was finally to that spot where, that made sense. So I get why they try to kind of move some guys around and try to figure out what it is. But to your point, I get it too. Like, you don't want guys getting to the big leagues and it's like you're making all the adjustments that I talked about earlier, like, lifestyle, different coverage, different stresses, talent's way better. And also here's a new position. It's not ideal for, building a sustainable organization, but, it's also trying to line up everybody's service time and everybody's talent to hit at the same time. It's harder in Kansas City. Like, a GM with Kansas City has to do a better job than the GM in New York because, he's got way more leeway and way more money to play with and can make 4 or 5 mistakes. Whereas in Kansas City, you better hit on all your choices.
So I'm going to step on Soren's toes here. I know he wants to ask this, but I'm terrified we're going to let you go without asking. Do you have a good Zack Greinke story? Is there something? I mean, I'm sure you do. I'm sure. Is there one you can share? Maybe you haven't told before. I'm just curious. Something that the moment you said this guy is different. Is there something like that?
I mean, I love Zack. I mean, I've known him for a long time, and we're still friends. He actually lives out here in Arizona. Well, one of his houses, I don't know, but he's here, and his kids are a little bit younger than mine, but we see them and stuff. And my wife and Zack's wife are friends. So, but yeah, I mean, obviously, right away. I mean, you guys know Zack. When you meet him, he's different. But I just love that where he's at now, and I really enjoyed watching the last couple of years in Kansas City and just seeing how comfortable he is. I feel like early on, he's always been Zack. Like, he hasn't tried to change for anybody. But I think early on there was that feeling like, well, you got to kind of start fitting into the mold a little bit, and he did somewhat, but I feel like now he's completely comfortable with who he is, and I love that he just kind of lets his personality show. But as far as specific stories, I've told a few, and a few have been in the 3 or 4 articles written about him and stuff. But I just loved his honesty, because I tell a story of one day I went a couple strikeouts, 0 for, and probably made an error or two, and we were in the cafeteria area or whatever after the game, and he came in sitting next to me, and not trying to be rude at all. He just kind of like, man, Mark, you did not play well today. And he was absolutely right. And, and And it's funny, if anyone else would have said that, I would have just kind of jumped on him. And Zack said it, and I was like, yeah, I mean, you're right. Yeah, I'll do better tomorrow and whatever.
Yeah.
But it was cool because it didn't matter the situation. Like, he was honest with it. But we had a team meeting because Jose Guillen had pissed somebody off or whatever. And
Shocking.
Stunning there.
yeah, shocking indeed. So I think he was in the lineup, but then he was trying to fight the whole team. So he ended up not being in the lineup. So the next day before the game, he calls a team meeting, and we're all in the gym, of course, assuming he's going to say, sorry guys, like that, I got to control myself better. I'm one of the veterans on this team. I should be a leader and not a person causing a huge problem. But instead, the whole conversation was, I can't believe you guys didn't stand up for me. And like, I was the player rep for the union, and for some reason I was supposed to do so. I don't know what the thought was, but he's like parading the team, and Zack stands up, and he's not confrontational, but Zack stands up and he's like, he kind of looks around, he's like, why are we all listening to this? and it was so true. I was like, yeah, good point, dude. Like, what are we doing here? Like this.
Yeah. He's absolutely the best. We're proudly brought to you by our friends at GAN Asphalt and Concrete, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. Free consultations, no commissions, in-house crews. Every project comes with a written warranty. Avoid unnecessary delays. Let you focus on your business, not deal with problems with liability because you got a poorly striped parking lot, or you've got a bad impression that you're making with your clients or your customers with a bad parking lot. Fix it all with GAN Asphalt and Concrete. You can find them online at ganasphalt.com. You made this story about like the opposite ends of the spectrum with Konerko and Billy Butler. Like, you and Zack are kind of my opposite ends of the spectrum. Like the two favorite guys I had to interview, and we got a great rapport in having you. And back then we had the 810 zone down on the plaza, and you lived down on the plaza. So you'd come down and be there in person, and we could chat before and afterwards. And it was so comfortable because we had, time together and everything. And we always look forward to that. All of us on the show always look forward to you coming down, or when you were on the phone on the road. It was always great. And because you made it so easy. But I love talking to Zack because he makes it so hard. It's
right.
a challenge, right? Zack is not like, you were the kind of guy, and I even remember standing there sometimes after the game, and, somebody like, talk about so-and-so. And you're such a nice guy, Mark, that you would actually do it. If I were in your shoes, I'd be like, he likes blue shoes. I'd have some just rude remark. Like, I always think that's a lazy question. Talk about that. Like, ask the guy a question and he'll give you an answer. What is it about the game you want to know? And there's a lot of guys that just lob things out there. And God bless you, baseball guys are the best. Football guys are a bit more of a pain in the ass and are willing to just be like, that's stupid. But Zack was like that. And Zack also, if you asked him something and he was into it, he would take a moment to sit and think about what it was. What is the real answer to this? So there'd be this pause, this, and which I love. Silence in broadcasting is a wonderful thing. It draws you in. I know Ryan Lefevre very well. Ryan gets it. Like, you don't have to be talking the whole time. Sometimes just let it breathe. Zack would always let it breathe. And it was because he was thinking, and I would see him, kind of going through, like, I pictured a Rolodex in his head. I remember what's the best restaurant in Surprise, Arizona? Maybe going through, where all have I eaten? What is it? And at the end, he'd go, I'd have to say Chipotle. It's just the mind, if we could all live in that world of just raw honesty.
Right.
Like, it's fantastic. And, what was he? I'm curious. I remember when there were people, and I even work with some of them, like Zack Greinke could never play for a Yankees, and of course he goes to the Angels and the Dodgers and Diamondbacks. He's in big markets, Astros, playing on big teams. I always said, listen, I don't think Zack gives a crap what anybody in the media says or anybody else. I think he's perfectly wired to play in all those spots because he doesn't care how many people are standing around him or whatnot. He's going to give you what he wants to say. And I found that refreshing. Did you always feel like wherever Zack goes, Zack's going to be a success?
Yeah, I thought so. I mean, I did question the same thing with going to the big markets just because I felt like he would have been worn out and just not want to deal with it. But I mean, you're completely right. Just like I said before, like Zack was always going to be Zack. He wasn't going to change because, some demand was put on him or whatever. So, yeah, I mean, he's, like you said, just brutally honest, but I think everything is thoughtful. Like he goes through the process and he's not just going to give you a, whatever answer. But yeah, he's always been entertaining. And I always love like any interview I see with him, whether it be like really engaged or just kind of his one word answers, like all of it I find entertaining.
Yeah. The wry smile where you can tell he's got a little bit of, something. When he came back to the team and I was walking down, they gave all the guys like a media every day. They're now handing him like almost like a yearbook page of which one of us media guys are there, where we work, and what it is. And it, I hadn't seen Zack in a long time, and I'm heading down towards him, and he's sitting there at his locker stall, and he's looking at this page, and he looks up at me, and it's been, I don't know, whatever it had been, 10, 12 years or whatever. And he just looks up at me and turns the page and goes, "There you are." With a little smile on his face. And, it's like, it's good to have Zack back and to watch his career and watch him, be still pitching in his late 30s is amazing. What are you doing now? Like, first of all, show everybody, we were chatting beforehand, show everybody your t-shirt there. What SIP happens?
What happens, yeah. So it's Source of Wine Room. The cursive a little hard to read on this shirt, but my 2014, I was in spring with the Giants. Sorry, I know that was sensitive in 2014, but I wasn't there long. Don't worry. So I was there in minor league camp and got released, and it was kind of like, all right, my last 2 years had kind of been a decline, so I kind of knew my career was probably over here in the States unless I wanted to go play independent ball, which I'd done for a couple of months the year previous just to get a chance at spring training that year. So anyway, actually that night we had dinner with Michael Lewis from Moneyball because we always did every spring. And he mentioned that once he graduated college, he went and spent time in San Gimignano over in Italy and just kind of wrote and took some time away. And he said there's a league over there if you're interested in playing, like I could see if I know anybody or whatever. But I had prepared to play that season. So I was like, yeah, why don't we go and check it out? So my wife and I, a week later, were over in Italy. We just flew in, rented a car, and kind of drove to all the cities that had a team. And, nobody cares about baseball over in Italy. There's small pockets that care about it. But while we were there, we kind of saw this wine bar concept where they have these machines where you can do like a half glass or quarter glass or a full glass, so you can try a bunch of different stuff. And during that trip, I kind of realized, I was like, even if I get offered to play over here, I just feel like I'm worn out and ready for the next thing. So we were at this wine bar and, we're self-educating on Italian wines and kind of decided like, oh, Scottsdale needs something like this. My wife had always worked prior to us starting to date and stuff. And she ended up getting laid off from her job. And so it always bugged her that she had to kind of follow me around. She was like, I want to do something. So we had talked about owning a business together and running a business together once I was done. And we started talking about this wine bar and ultimately just found the right space and everything. And so within a year, like that first opening day that I wasn't playing, we were opening Source of Wine Room, wine bar up at the Scottsdale Quarter here in Scottsdale. So
if Royals fans come out for spring training, how do they get there? What's the best way, or what's the website? If they want to check it out, then they get the address and everything.
Yeah.
And how often are you there? And are you willing to sit and talk baseball with people?
So the website is Sorso, SORSO wineroom.com, and pretty easy to find. And we're at the Scottsdale Quarter. It's kind of North Scottsdale over by Kierland. So a lot of people come out and stay at the Westin Kierland. It's really close to that. And we do have a lot of Kansas City people come in, so it's nice. And, a lot of people know we own it. And to be honest, I was there a ton when we first opened. And now I kind of try to go in. A lot of days we do drop off the kids, go do our work at Sorso. And before it starts getting busy, I try to get out of there because, don't want to have to deal with too many problems. but yeah, if I'm there and I mean, and people come in, I love to sit there and talk ball or talk whatever. So it's fun, and I mean, we've enjoyed it. We've had it for almost 9 years now, and it's been really cool to be like kind of build something else after baseball and then see it kind of come to fruition and be successful. And we have some employees that have been with us that's been with us the entire time we've been open. So it's really cool to see that it's, supplying a job for some people that, it's their livelihood, and it's been good. We've really enjoyed it throughout the years.
So is the goal to have many, many locations, or is one good enough?
Initially we looked at 2 other locations and we're like, oh yeah, let's just go, let's build this thing up. And it is a repeatable concept. We could for sure do more, but with our kids just continuing to get busier and busier, and like my wife and I are the only owners. We don't have partners or anything like that. So I think if we were to do more locations, it'd be something where we'd have to get partners and stuff. And then it becomes a whole bigger thing, which we're not opposed to, but it's not an immediate goal right now.
All right. Last question. How much baseball do you watch? How much do you keep an eye on the Royals?
I'll be on the first few years where I wasn't playing, I didn't watch it. Like I said, my last 2 years after being in the big leagues were a grind. And, I always say like AAA is awesome when you're a prospect coming up, but when you're heading the other direction, it's completely different. So, for a couple of years there, our kids were really young and we were busy with that and getting the business started. So I kind of took a step away and didn't watch a ton. Of course, always watch the playoffs. But truthfully, the Royals being in the World Series, the first game I went to after retiring was the wild card game against the A's. So I had to come back to Kansas City and see. I mean,
you're a true Royal, Mark Teahen. I think we
right?
can make that official.
Yeah.
Kansas City was so good to the city with a team that they deserve, and it was awesome to see. And then we were able to come back for a World Series game later that year, and came to the first 2 World Series games in 2015. So we're huge Royals fans. The kids know where their loyalty lies. We for sure, jumped on the Diamondbacks bandwagon this year, and I told the kids that can be their National League team. But my boys are now at an age where they really love the game, so we watch quite a bit now, and try to get them to sit down with me and talk baseball as we're watching games.
Well, that's awesome. That's great to hear. Mark, we really appreciate you taking some time out. We probably kept you too long, but I always enjoy the conversation. It's always great talking baseball, but talking life with you as well. I'm glad to see that everything's going really well for you and your family. Best of luck to everybody on that. And hopefully we'll see you back here in Kansas City at some point.
Sounds good. Yeah. Enjoyed it. Appreciate the time.
There he is, Mark Teahen. And I'll tell you, Randy, I mentioned it. Always love talking to him, and always a down to earth guy. Mm-hmm. And you hear it there. It's self-deprecating humor, and but just an absolute class act. And I love when you have somebody who, like, I have a friend who, always says he coaches, and he says, like, make sure, he's a basketball coach. He says, make sure, you use basketball doesn't use you. And I love stories like Mark's where it seems like Mark used baseball. Right. Baseball didn't use Mark. To a degree, it does. Right. You're part of the infrastructure and the factory that it is. But just to see him doing great and, being able to go from baseball to having a great business now and living in Arizona, the family, that's what it's all about. That's a great baseball life.
Yeah. It's a great baseball life, great baseball story. Like everything I knew about Mark, this is the first time I've talked to him, face to face, but everything I've known about him going back, 20 years is that he had a really level head on his shoulders, like you said, self-deprecating, kind of self-aware. And he seems to be living exactly the life that you would hope for every player to have, in their post-playing days. He's, has married and kids and great family. He's, presumably he made a decent amount of money in the game, and he's got his, his own business now. And he's got his memorability, but he's not consumed by it. Like, he's had the career that I'd like to think I would have the same kind of post-playing career if I had been a player like him. So I'm very happy for him. And the fact that he's got his kids still rooting for the Royals from Arizona. The 2023 Royals, he's got them rooting for. More power to him. So I'm very happy for him, and it was great talking with him.
We're always brought to you by our friends at Gann Asphalt and Concrete, nationally recognized full-service paving and pavement maintenance contractor, making parking lot problems disappear in Kansas City since 1994. If you need help with anything that goes with your parking lot, make sure you find them online at GannAsphalt.com. Make sure you tell them you heard about them right here on the Kauffman Corner podcast. So for the good doctor, Dr. Rany Jazayerli, I'm Soren Petro, and of course for Mark Teahen, thank you to Mark for joining us. We will see you next week